And Susan emailed me through my website as well, and she said that she was born in the 60s, born with what astrologers call a conjunction between Uranus and Pluto. So if you think back, whether or not you were around in the 60s or not, we all know that the 60s were a time of a lot of social change. And a huge symbol in the sky that indicated this was the fact that Uranus and Pluto were very close together, dancing very close together through most of the 60s, indicating these changes and sort of heralding some of the big social movements, big social changes that were about to happen for us. So Susan asked and said that she in her own life has been experiencing this awakening of peaceful activism, as she called it, and wondered if the current Uranus and Pluto, what I've been calling the generation-defining conversation between Uranus and Pluto, if this square configuration has anything to do with the changes that she's experiencing in her life. And so the short answer is maybe. But really for all of us, there are a few factors to take into consideration, especially if you're one of those people who's experiencing a lot of change in your life. Whether you are experiencing it in a way that pleases you or whether you're experiencing it in a way that maybe feels a little jarring, which Uranus has a tendency to do. Uranus can be a jarring kind of energy. Pluto, in its own way, yes, because Pluto is about getting rid of the superfluous. So the more superfluous you have in your life, Pluto comes along and the more you're going to experience that energy. But here's the thing. There are a couple of things I just want you to consider. And that is the fact that you want to look at, when we're looking at what's happening with Pluto in the sky, what's happening with Uranus in the sky as it relates to you and your life. You also want to think about how important is that energy to you based on your unique birth chart. So based on what was happening in the sky at the time of your birth, but also based on what is your rising sign, your moon sign, your sun sign. So if you know anything about your chart, you've had an astrologer look at your chart, and you are aware that Uranus is making, like, not even the two of them, not even if you were born in the 60s, but let's just say you weren't born in the 60s and you don't have these planets together. If we're just looking at Uranus or just looking at Pluto, how active, how many conversations is Uranus having with personal planets in your chart? So you want to look at, and I'm sorry to get a little technical here, I'll try to keep it really basic for those non-astrologers out there, but what you want to look at is Mercury, Sun, Moon, Venus, and Mars. These essentially are called the personal planets, and also the ascendant as well, the rising sign as well. Is Uranus speaking with a lot of these different placements? And especially is Uranus, for example, Uranus, speaking in conversations that are maybe not so easy. So meaning in conversations that are oppositions or squares. That energy is going to be that much more important. So whenever Uranus moving around the sky does something, if you've got a very active Uranus in your chart, if you're strongly identified with that energy, then you are going to experience what's happening with Uranus now more than somebody else who maybe doesn't have as much of an active Uranus energy. This is true for Pluto as well. Also, as you may know, if you watch the weekly horoscopes, you know I like to say that your ruling planet is your representative in the sky. So you want to think about what is the ruling planet of your rising sign, your moon sign, and your sun sign. So Uranus is the ruling planet of Aquarius. If you've got a rising moon or sun in Aquarius, what Uranus does becomes that much more important for you. The ruling sign for Pluto is Scorpio. Now, here's the interesting thing also. When we look at the planets, if your sign is ruled by one of the transpersonal or outer planets, meaning Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto, then that energy, when those planets do something in the sky and it speaks to your particular birth chart in a way, either being the ruling planet of an important placement in your chart or is speaking to your unique birth chart in a certain way, you're going to feel that a lot more than you would, for example, the moon. And that's because these planets, the transpersonal outer planets, move slowly around the zodiac. So if you have a particular type of conversation of Pluto, for example, well, some people might never go through the type of conversation that Pluto is making to your unique birth chart, because Pluto takes so long to go around the zodiac. It takes 260 years to go around the zodiac, and we as human beings don't live that long. So if Pluto's doing something in your chart, you're going to feel that a lot more than, say, the moon, because the moon goes around the zodiac every 28 and a half days. We all get used to experiencing conversations of the moon to our personal birth chart. So to answer your questions, it depends. Where exactly is this configuration? How tight, meaning how close are the planets in precision? And then how strongly identified are you with the energies of Uranus or Pluto? You put all that together, and that will speak to whether or not this configuration is speaking more poignantly to you. But all else being equal, if you are born with a strong conversation between Uranus and Pluto, like those born in the 60s, then yes, all else being equal, when Uranus and Pluto have conversations, you are likely going to identify with that energy. That energy is likely to speak to you and change you in significant ways, more than perhaps someone else who is not born under a strong influence of these two planets. So that's a very simple way of putting it, but I hope that helps, Susan, and I hope that helps a lot of other people out there as well. I love your questions. I love your interactions. I love reading you guys online on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, my website, nadiyashah.com. Please do continue reaching out, and I will continue to answer your questions as well.